Science fiction. It likes to tease us about what the future might possibly hold. But eventually the future catches up with it and we find ourselves living it. For the longest time, the year 2000 had been the future. Well, here it is, the year 2000, and we're living it. And Microsoft just recently released Windows 2000, the latest version of its Windows operating system. Now, while Windows 2000 is too large and technically depth of a project to talk about in one episode of the MSDN show, we can cover it one piece at a time. And today, we're going to talk about Active Directory, what it is and how you can make use of it in your application. But before we get to that, let's check out the latest news with Erica Wiechers.
Hello, I'm Erica Wiechers, and welcome to the MSDN News Update. Microsoft Systems Journal and Microsoft Internet Developer have merged to form the new MSDN magazine. This new monthly magazine will offer the full range of Microsoft development solutions and technologies in one single publication for both Windows and web developers. MSDN magazine hits both the newsstands and the web with full content on February 22nd. For more information about MSDN magazine, visit msdn.microsoft.com/msdnmag. Microsoft recently released a white paper designed to provide detailed architectural guidance for organizations building .com sites using Windows DNA. This new white paper, created for and by systems architects, is titled A Blueprint for Building Websites Using the Microsoft Windows DNA Platform and can be found on the MSDN website. Check the show transcript for the full URL. This spring, Microsoft will launch updated system software for Pocket PC devices based on Windows CE. The new Pocket PCs will include embedded runtimes for MFC, ADO, CF, and VB, and will make it easier for developers to use these components. These runtimes will be accessible via broadly available development tools for Visual Basic and Visual C++. Stay tuned for a future episode of the MSDN show, which will focus on the architecture and development of applications for Pocket PC. More information can be found at msdn.microsoft.com/cetools. Nordstrom, the high-end clothing retailer, recently deployed a new shopping website specifically devoted to assisting people in finding and buying just the right shoe. They built their website using Windows DNA, a choice that allowed them to go from idea to full implementation in only 90 days. To help share the story of this development effort, Microsoft has produced a dedicated website that contains the behind-the-scenes story of what it took to develop the solution. Check out the developer perspective behind NordstromShoes.com at www.shoestory.com/developer.asp. In January, MSDN Online released a special version of their developer website focused specifically at the needs of computer science and engineering college students. Its unique collection of content will include training projects, product information with special academic pricing, as well as links to developer information on other websites useful to student developers. Access the student portal from msdn.microsoft.com/students. And that's been the MSDN News Update. I'm Erica Wiechers.
To help us understand not only Windows 2000, but specifically Active Directory and how this technology is something that's important to pay attention to in developing your Windows applications, I have with me here two people that can really help shed the light on that. I have Brian Valentine, the Senior Vice President of the Windows Division, and Dave Thompson, General Manager of Windows Server. Now, first off, I want to take and congratulate you on Windows 2000 and the fact that that's now out the door and be shipping, this week sometime.
Yep.
And that means you guys are just like full of time, just kicking back and relaxing, nothing to worry
Absolutely.
about.
Oh yeah, it's been just, we released the manufacturing December 15th and it's been party ever since,
Oh,
right,
yeah.
Dave?
Absolutely.
Oh, yeah,
I'm kind of getting tired of the party. At
yeah,
this point.
I really,
Yeah.
or just, it's really getting old now.
Yeah, well,
Actually, it hasn't been that way. I mean, really the way it starts is, the team has been working for many years to get Windows 2000 out, but we all realize inside that, when you get to release to manufacturing, some people think that's the end, but in reality, it's just the start, right? I mean, Now we've got all this theory called Windows 2000. It's time to go prove the theory of Windows 2000, which means we're really active working with developers, really active working with customers, the field, support people, service providers, everybody, to really, move customers forward around the Windows 2000 platform and give them a much better business platform, much better hosting platform, all that kind of stuff. So it's the fun starts now, actually, not the party, and that was a joke, but the fun starts, because now you get to go out and actually have a product to go out and see people use and help them use it, and it's just been great.
Plus, you're also working on, what's coming down the line further. I mean, Windows 2000 is not the end of the line for Microsoft. We
not at
definitely
all.
have a lot more work going on, and Windows 2000 represents a step along that road.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay.
Now, specifically with Active Directory, where does Active Directory come from? I mean, what exactly is it doing in Windows 2000?
Well, Active Directory is in Windows 2000 to serve as the core platform element for distributed applications. Okay, it's all about the sharing and distribution of data for global applications, for applications to use for security, for common administration, for things like that. But fundamentally, it's about sharing and distribution of the data that applications need.
Well, I mean, back in the Windows 3 days, we had the .ini files, and Windows 95 and NT, we had the registration database. That sounds like the same sort of thing, though, isn't it?
Well, in the most simplistic sense, it could be similar to the registry, except that what it is it's a fully distributed, secure, scalable source of data that applications can both can share data that's common or use as a means of distributing data in a reliable, robust, and scalable way.
I mean, it really gives you, I mean, with the registry in NT4, you had single system stuff, right? I mean, you could do stuff on a single system. If you installed your app on it, you could twiddle with the registry. You can do whatever you wanted. You'd have to create your own metabase of information, all those kind of things. But there's really no good replicated global environment at all. And what the Active Directory does, it brings that whole globalness and that replication and the place to put data that can be replicated across the enterprise as, just a great service to an application developer.
Yeah, I'll give you a couple of key examples, and probably some of the two most important applications that use Active Directory. One of which is built in the system, and that's security. Okay, you want to be able to securely access resources from anywhere in the enterprise. You access a resource, it may need information from the directory to validate that you're the user that you say you are, or that you have the access rights that you say you are. Okay, that needs to happen no matter where you, the user, or the resource is, anywhere in a global enterprise network, in the internet, and Active Directory provides a secure platform to do that. The second classic example, and in fact the example that classically drives directories and did drive Active Directory in this case, is email. Okay, because email is also fully distributed. No matter where I am, I need to look up the people that I want to send mail to, the distribution lists, and then the mail system itself needs to use that to deliver the mail, okay, between servers that are distributed all over the world. So when I make updates to this database, I need to make updates to the shared data wherever I am, and then those need to flow out to all the places they need to be, to the different mail routers, to other users who also want to be able to use the same kinds of distribution lists. So again, it comes back to sharing and distribution, and that platform for sharing and distribution needs to be totally secure so that it can't be read or written by the wrong people, and very scalable, so the data just flows reliably around all the places the applications need it.
So to a certain extent, then, with the registration database in NT and Windows 95 and stuff like that was kind of like the PC as an island unto itself with just the data in that location. If I went over to another system, I had to recreate all that data all over again.
Right.
Where with
or
Active
apps
Directory,
would have to put the infrastructure into the application, right?
Right.
So what would happen is, there wasn't a global description of a user object necessarily that had all the ability to have all rich properties on it and everything else that all applications would need. So somebody building a distributed application on top of the Windows platform would have to go define their own user object extensions, and they would have to map it into their own database, and they would have to figure out how they do the replication across the enterprise. And they couldn't share it with other apps, right? I mean, yeah, they could publish it and things like that, but you wouldn't get the benefit of having it be that shared data. So every application would have its own address book or its own security schemes or everything else. And it was just all this plumbing that application developers were telling us, look, I don't want to be in that business. That's not where the value in my application is, right? My value is what I'm doing on top of all of that to provide the service to the end user. And they really wanted to, us to build that plumbing into the operating system. That's really what Active Directory brings to the party, is all that stuff. Besides that, just a replicated database where you can put all kinds of resource information.
And that brings up a good point. They're really the directory benefits two important sets of actually three sets of people. It benefits developers because it simplifies their job by coalescing this infrastructure, and it benefits developers by enabling them to have access to shared data that other applications use. It's a much more powerful platform because it's common. The second thing is it benefits end users because when the data is common, it's much more likely to be consistent and in sync. And they see the same view from each application. There's less confusion. Single sign-on, as an example. It used to be that all these applications had their own security systems, and the net result was that the user had to remember many different usernames and passwords. What Active Directory gives you that is probably the most useful thing and something we take for granted at Microsoft and is taken for granted at many customers that use exclusively NT, is that you sign on once and those credentials are transparently, seamlessly, and consistently available everywhere. It simplifies the user's life.
Now, with that level of security going on, where you're being validated throughout the company,
right,
at that level, does this create the notion that companies now need to carefully think about how they're deploying security throughout their company?
Companies always needed to think carefully about how they were deploying security. The good news is they only have to think about it once now, and it applies to all the applications that use it. I want to back up to one point, because I said there were three things, and I bet somebody out there was counting. Oh. And I only mentioned two.
I was Dave, but I just thought it was you, right? I didn't know if you could count beyond two.
Or maybe, at this age, things right, fall off the stack. Right. Yeah, I know. Thanks, Brian.
All right.
So the third class of people that's benefited, as you can imagine, though, is administrators, right? Because the administrators, they administer data, okay? They identify, track, configure a user, and they only do it once, and all the applications flow out of it, okay? So it's not just the end user's benefit, but the administrators. A directory, an Active Directory, as part of Windows 2000, provides a very powerful administration platform. Make a set of changes, and a whole bunch of applications get the same view of the common data.
And that can happen like on a daily level if the administrator wants to update some application settings across the entire corporate network. They can do that.
Absolutely, absolutely. It can happen as fine-grained as you want. The only things you have to be aware of is that when you make updates, okay, there is a cost in propagating those updates. In any system, if you want replication, you make a change. It invokes network traffic. It takes time for those to propagate. Active Directory, in its architecture, recognized that to be as scalable and flexible as possible, it's very important to do very fine-grained replication. It also has what's called state-based replication, so that it can easily catch up after network outages or connectivity outages. It's a system that flows towards consistency and does it in an efficiently a way as possible.
And the other thing is that, from an administrative view, Active Directory doesn't require humans to make changes. Like applications can make all their configuration changes real time in the system as things change or they want to deal with quality of service things or whatever. So when you're developing an application, it doesn't take an administrator to have to go tweak things, parameters or conditions around, as the network changes or as route changes or whatever. Applications can have that built right into the code. No human intervention at all. They do their configuration changes, whatever they need to do. It flows through the system. The other instances of their app running around the enterprise just automatically pick it up because they get notified there's been a change in the directory and they're watching for those changes. And so it's programmatic and it's also administrative and all those things all wrapped into one. And just one more example I'd like to give about just how we're using it inside Microsoft, because we're 100% deployed on Windows 2000 inside Microsoft today, and there's a lot on the 17th when we launch. We'll have a lot more examples at the launch event, but one of the big end user things, two examples that we've already implemented around Active Directory that's just a very big end user feature also is one, printer location. Right? Before, there was really no way to know what printers were in your building. There was no way to know if I had a color printer on the second floor of my building or not. Now I just bring up, built into Windows 2000, just bring up the printer dialog and say, find me a color printer in building 26, which is my building, and boom, I get 2 or 3 choices. I can look at the configurations on those and the like. And I can, if I'm in building 16, because I happen to be in a meeting and I take my laptop with me and I need to print something real quick, I can go bang, show me the printers in building 16, and it's all right there. And that's really the print subsystem of Windows, using Active Directory to publish that information. But any application could publish any kind of resources the same way. The second big benefit of it is the whole roaming user kind of aspect of Windows 2000, where I can really go, log on to any machine at Microsoft now and have my desktop settings come with me, have my applications come with me. Before at Microsoft, when you wanted to get a new version of an app, somebody either sent you a link in email, and if you saw it, you got it. If you didn't, or we had these product servers where you'd go up and you'd download applications off of servers, and you'd have to really know that there was a new version of the app out there. Because we have that Active Directory infrastructure, we can now publish applications through the Active Directory mechanism. When I log on, the system looks in Active Directory and says, oh, look, I'm Brian. I'm in the development group in the Windows development group. I'm a developer. I'm an engineering manager. I'm a finance person or a marketing person, whatever my job function is. And it can present me an environment that's relevant to my job, because that's what we've decided as a company to configure up for people in those departments. And if we didn't have that in Active Directory, we couldn't have that very tightly integrated experience for the user that goes across their normal usage of the system, their applications, and just, how they like to move around the system. It was all in different specific to applications. So if I went someplace else, I'd have to go find the app and install it and configure it and log on to it differently. Now all that's just integrated in the system, and applications can take full advantage of that as they develop to the directory.
Plus, I know one of the problems I always had on the old system was that, they'd stick the application out in the product server. I'd install from there with some CD image stuff, and then the product server would move it somewhere else, and all of a sudden I'd get a breakage going on.
Yep, you can never keep track of that stuff. Now it's all done for you automatically.
In fact, that highlights one of the core differentiators in the directory and the registry, for example. Is the registry is a structured way to read and write data, and the directory provides that as well. But the other thing that the directory is used for is to implement many of these services is a very powerful query mechanism, right? So that query mechanism, for example, is used in a more generic example, what Brian talked about, service location, okay? And when I say generic, printer finding is an example of using service location, right? Any service that you install, in this case install a printer, in another case install a database, or install a product download server, can register in the directory as that service. And then you can do an enterprise-wide query for services of that type and pick based on the attributes, such as the location in the case of the printer, or the fact that it's a color printer. This is very powerful for application developers, because the classic problem has been when you moved and reconfigured things to adapt for growth, that users had to refine them, and the directory just takes care of that.
Well, for example, here at Microsoft, we have, building and floor is a very common way of doing it, so I can see that having a printer by the building and floor, that's all I need to know. Some other company might have some totally different way of doing it that doesn't immediately create a visual location of where you're at, so they could configure that location information however is appropriate to that company, rather than having building floor built into the operating system and Active Directory itself.
Sure. Yep. Active Directory comes with a set of known objects and a set of properties on those objects, like user objects and printer objects, because those are just built into the system, right? And administrators, human beings, or applications can extend those objects relevant to whatever they need to do in their application, or they can create brand new objects, right? So just because you want, if an application is presenting some kind of service, and it's got location ability around that service, they can do it the same way we've done with printers. There's nothing we've done in the operating system that says it's only the operating system that can do those things. You can extend it by adding objects. You can extend it by adding properties. You can, you can create your own namespaces within it and do whatever an application needs to do to get its job done, which is, one of the powers of really having that global directory or Active Directory in there.
Right. Now, I suppose that, our developer audience that's watching the show right now, those people who know they need Active Directory, know why they need it, but there's probably some people out there that say, Active Directory really doesn't apply to me. What are some examples you can provide that show how Active Directory can kind of apply to almost any application?
Well, the most common one is the one I mentioned, I think, service location, because in building any distributed application, that is the most common problem, is finding an instance of the service, or finding the right instance of service, finding another instance of service when there's a failure or something like that. So that's kind of the most generic thing. The second broad class of usage is around some of the common objects already in the directory, and the user object is the most common example of that. Okay, it's easy to write if you've already got information in the directory about the user, the organization, their level or qualifications. It's easy to add things like additional attributes on the same users that, for instance, identify what their level of approval is for an accounting application, or what their level of quality of service is, their rights to access certain resources in the enterprise for applications that use that, their telephone number for telephony-based applications, right? I mean, there's already a pointer in there for the user's home page, for a personalized web page that could be a kickoff point to all kinds of other information. So it's leveraging that by using properties that are already there, or extending properties on the user object. That is the most common, administration and data sharing information in enterprises is typically user-centric.
Yeah, every distributed app, I won't say every because maybe there's a few that aren't, but almost every distributed application that runs an enterprise needs to know something about the user, because there's all these business rules and business logic that go with the application. So whether it's a procurement application that needs to check what your signing authority is, and if you don't have signing authority at that level, it needs to kick it up to a person who has the signing authority in your signing chain, right? Well, you can put all of that property and that data in the Active Directory and have it replicated everywhere. So no matter where the user's connecting, and they're using all client-side code in your application, they can check the Active Directory, or if they need to go to a back-end server to do stuff, they can find it easily. But basically, every application you write has some level of business logic in it, and if you think about that logic and how it needs to flow through the business rules in that enterprise, Active Directory plays a big part of that now, where before you had to go build that whole infrastructure into your application. Now you can have all these apps that know, I've got, this level of authority, or I'm at this part in the organization, or here's my management hierarchy, or, here's the size of my group, or, anything dealing with business logic, or, if
my location,
your location,
right, where my
everything,
office is,
right? So, I mean, it gives you that one nice central place that really effectively takes all that plumbing work. We build the 4-inch PVC pipes for, the enterprise, and Active Directory is one of those pipes that applications had to go lay their own piping before. Now you get all that as built into the system, and it's very extensible. So that's the big power of it, is the extensibility and the replication aspects of it.
Okay, so let's assume that I write my application and I'm using Active Directory and I'm querying user stuff across the network. And let's say someone buys my application and installs it on their home PC that's not on a network. Do I have to take and code things differently for that? Does that create a different situation?
What you need to do with any application that uses the directory, and this is a very good point, Robert, is that you need to write the application so it can work without the directory as well, in a sense. And typically, for instance, if you load configuration information, you'll want to cache that information in a persistent way, so when you get offline, you can use it. Or you'll have a degraded mode of operation. Or there are certain applications, things that fundamentally are about finding things, they simply won't be able to work, and it won't make any sense to have them installed on a home PC unless they're connected to the directory. Okay, but it is important that whenever you write a directory-enabled application, you like any distributed application, all the other pieces of the same app, you need to deal with the cases where the service is not available because the user's offline or there's a network failure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so what effectively you could build synchronization into your application for when they go offline. So you could say, okay, query the directory, bring down the relevant information I need. That is the degrade state when you're running offline, or the full state when you're running offline. Obviously, if you want to provide a richer experience offline, you got to bring more with the user, right? And so you have to just manage that in your application as to what level of service you want to provide offline. But basically, you just build the application where you do the query against the directory. It gives you your data set that is relevant to the user when they're offline. You basically build that offline cache like Dave talked about, and then you just have it there available to query against when you're offline. And obviously, when you think about that application, there might be scenarios where they don't have enough information, need to go back online, well, you just basically can build in, the RAS connectivity or the VPN connectivity or whatever, bring them back online or queue up stuff for when they go back online and those kind of things. And so there's still, levels of application support that you have to do there in your own application. And as we move Windows forward in the future, we'll continue to enhance, offline storage and offline caching and everything else. But yeah, I mean, it's all there from Active Directory, and then you as the designer of the app decide what levels go offline and how you move that data offline. But it's easy queries and storage mechanisms to do that with.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, an example of that is the offline address book and Exchange. And as Brian said, while we'll add more and more support for making it easier to do offline operations, fundamentally, how every application uses offline information tends to be very application specific, right? In the address book, they know what fields are important to carry around or how much, and the user gets to choose in some cases. So,
okay.
What about the situation where you have an environment that isn't all Windows machines, like an interop level? Does Active Directory supply any support for interoperability between legacy systems and non-Windows systems?
There are actually two ways we support interoperability with Active Directory, and one is that Active Directory for Windows down-level clients provides the same compatible security infrastructure that they're used to, okay? And it's important to say that as you upgrade a system, you don't have to upgrade all your domain controllers at the same time. You don't have to upgrade all the clients. We do that because there's a very high degree of compatibility, okay? But the broader interoperability issue is that the protocols to access Active Directory are standard protocols. We use LDAP. With LDAP, any application, any device can access Active Directory simply by following the LDAP spec. The level of security, we implement Kerberos as a security protocol, and that's also a standard. And so it's easy to write applications from other platforms that in fact talk to Active Directory.
Okay, so you've mentioned scalability a number of times. How does scalability in the enterprise and reliability fit into what Windows 2000 and specifically Active Directory can support here?
Well, in Active Directory, we provide enterprise scalability in a number of different ways, okay? And you need to think about scalability in every element of using a directory. I mean, first off, the directory itself as a store can handle very large numbers of objects. We routinely test the 50 million objects in the directory, which is substantially larger than any enterprise needs at this time. The other thing is that we offer a hierarchical structure, okay? And hierarchy lets you scale the administration. You don't have to have all the administration done in one place by one person or one small organization. You can distribute throughout your enterprise the administration by delegating both pieces of the hierarchy and also different kinds of operations within that. So you can have certain people that are allowed to install printers, for example, whereas there are others that administer accounts and do higher security issues. And so that's a very important thing in terms of scalability. You need to be able to deliver a system that lets the administrators and the users scale in their use of the system as well. The other thing is that we have, with our very efficient replication and support for complex topologies and automatic reaction to and generation of topologies, you can build a system with hundreds of replicas distributed all over the world. For reliability, one of the key features in Active Directory is what's called multi-master replication. It means that applications can do updates, in fact, writes at different replicas in case they can't reach this replica because of a partitioning in the network. And that's the replica and being able to do all kinds of operations to replicas is one of the key pieces. And I'll say one other point about that in terms of programming, and that is that with multi-master replication, you get enhanced reliability and availability. At the same time, you get some complexity because when you update things in two places, you need to be prepared for consistency issues if your app really does update the same thing twice. And so applications can choose to do that, or they can choose to make an update at a single place for simplicity, right? So it's really up to the application. Think about it as a flexible substrate for distributed applications. So those are the kinds of things, and there are many more elements. But that's the main thing to remember, is that it is attacking each one of those elements is key to building something that really has global scalability.
So an example of like replication from a Microsoft standpoint is, we have a number of subsidiaries around the world, and you talk about address book. This would allow us to take the Redmond store of the address book and replicate it to our Paris office and our Beijing office and stuff like that.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, that plus a user change. Here's a day-to-day example, okay, where everybody, it's not just administrators updating the directory, and that is the user changes their password. And they change their password here, and then they travel to Paris. Well, is there a new password over in Paris too? Because that's probably the directory server they're going to talk to authenticate. And the answer is yes. Okay. If they make a change over in Paris to update their password again, it flows back over here. Mm-hmm. So that's another key element of the mobility that the
and from the mobility aspect is, if you're developing an application on top of Active Directory, if I'm in Redmond, I may want to hit the instance of the server running in Redmond, right? But if I travel over to Beijing and there's slow links, right, and all of those type of things, then you might, it gives the application developer the flexibility to say, okay, if I log on in Beijing, I want to hit the instance of the app running in Beijing because I know I've got a high-speed link to the instance there. Where in the old days, the app might not be smart enough and know about location and where the user's at and those kind of things, and then hit you back to Redmond, which you're going over an expensive link back to Redmond just to get to your back end of the application. So you can now have capabilities in the applications where you can, build a much more intelligent distributed model around routing information and flexibility of the network and things like that. And I think another great thing about Active Directory is, and we kind of built this in Exchange from the early days, but now all applications get the capability, is the whole dynamicness of the system. You can bring a server on anywhere in the enterprise, and the administrator doesn't have to do anything, right, other than install the server and start it up and running. It picks up all the replication. It configures itself into the route, right? So the system knows that this new server's come online. If this happens to be a hub server that you've now put on because you've got some kind of load issue in Europe or something, or you've put in a least cost link of how to do network replication and email replication, those kind of things across a different link, you don't have to manually reconfigure anything, right? The system just discovers these new links exist. They have these different cost routes about them, so it can dynamically reconfigure the cost routing of the system and everything else for doing email routing through the system, or if your application's using email as its delivery mechanism around the enterprise, can pick up the new routing, any other way that the routing affects your application. The system just automatically, dynamically configures itself, where in older directory systems or older distributed systems like that, administrators had to go reroute routing tables and do all this stuff, and it was just a nightmare from the sense of trying to build that system up once you scaled to a certain level, where now it's just all taken care of for you.
Just plug and play.
It's plug and play in a sense, in the directory sense, absolutely.
Now, in talking about worldwide access, going to Beijing and to Paris and Redmond, stuff like that, and email, that brings up the notion of the internet. How does the Active Directory in Windows 2000 play in that internet model?
That's an excellent question. The Active Directory can be used not just inside an enterprise, but also as the directory, the security infrastructure for an internet site, for example. The scale, I said it, we test it to 50 million objects. That's even larger than most internet sites need today, but we're testing it at higher and higher levels on a daily basis, and expect that as we move forward, we'll grow those numbers even further. But in terms of structure, it really, the flexibility in the structure lets you implement a directory as a flat database, if you will, or a flat database of structured elements around your customers, for example, providing them secure access to services, providing them with additional profile or control information for the applications that you're going to provide to them over the internet. As well, if you were trying to provide services to independent organizations, you can substructure the directory, say, with what we call organizational units. And an organizational unit can be the piece of infrastructure that's assigned to the customer to who you're providing service. So a small business, for example, could have their own organizational unit, or OU, and the users for that business could be in that OU, and they could see only that OU. In fact, you could delegate administration to the customer that you're providing this service to as well. So it works both inside the enterprise and externally, for a flat base of consumer customers, or for a set of business customers.
So intranet, extranet, as well as an internet model, all applying with the same capabilities from Active
Yeah, I
Directory.
mean, if you're an ISP or an ASP or somebody building, applications around that kind of consumer hosting environment, you need a directory, right? You got to put your user information somewhere. You want to deliver different levels of services depending upon whether the customer is a standard customer, a higher paying customer, a business customer, whatever. And so you've got to put that information somewhere. And in the past, you built it all yourself, right? It's back to building all that plumbing yourself. Well, with Active Directory supporting LDAP and all the standard protocols, then you can build up this service infrastructure inside your enterprise or inside your hosting environment, really is what it is, around Active Directory, have all of that information in there, and then because we support those standard protocols, you don't have to go necessarily dictate how a client comes in, what client they're using, or those type of things. You just sell them the service, and based on what they're buying from you, Active Directory has all that profile information and service information around it. So, my recommendation is if you're going to go build out an ISP environment or a hosting environment, you got to put your resource information somewhere, put it in Active Directory because it's such a powerful system to do that with.
Mm-hmm. And that brings to mind one other capability I think I should mention, and that is that within the structured data of the directory, that is to say a user object has many different fields or attributes, we have the support for very fine-grained security. So you can allow access to certain elements of the object or certain attributes and disallow others. You could allow a user, for example, in our deployment, we allow users to update their own home phone number. We allow other users only to read those home phone numbers, or only a subset of those users. So when you're dealing with customers as a service provider and you want to delegate administration, you can let them change certain fields, but the fields of the user that you use across your customers or that are part of your service provisioning, you can limit access to those. Right, so that rich security model is very important to be able to provide the view and the access appropriate to the customers and to the administrators.
Which just makes it more important then for corporations to really think through the security model they're using, which they should be doing anyway, and they should have been doing for years now.
Right.
Yep.
Yeah.
Right.
Now, our audience, like I said, is programmers, and so the expectation is that they're watching the show because they want to find out about Active Directory and how to actually add code within their applications for Active Directory. Is there anything you want to tell them specifically that you feel developers need to understand in order to properly grok Active Directory in their applications?
I think there are two things, and I'll preface it by saying that we invested a lot of effort in our programming guide that's part of MSDN, and my first suggestion is that they read that carefully. ADSI is the API for programming the directory. I know that we're going to talk about that in detail later. And that's a major piece of it. We've done our best to provide a simple and high-level set of services for application developers with ADSI. It's a very efficient and easy-to-use programming model. But the key thing to be aware of is in any distributed system, when you update data and it replicates, okay, if you update it here, you read it over there, until it replicates, it's not there. It may not arrive all at once, okay? And those kinds of consistency issues in distributed applications are an important thing to be aware of, okay? And the programmer's guide talks about all that, about ways to simplify consistency issues, or in the case where you want the maximum reliability and flexibility, how to deal with consistency issues, how to identify when things have been updated correctly, and how to structure your data. One of the other key things is that you want to utilize objects as they exist. You want to extend when necessary and generate new objects if necessary, kind of in succession, because the schema is a very fundamental thing, an important thing to get right in the application. We've spent a lot of time developing the schema that's in Active Directory, and so I would recommend first looking at utilizing that for data that's already there or shared. Secondly, for updating attributes on those objects, or extending those objects themselves. And then thirdly, if necessary, adding additional objects.
Well, at the beginning I mentioned that Windows 2000, great application, finally, released to manufacturing, available in stores, is not necessarily the end of the road as far as Microsoft and Windows going, but we've got more things going on after this. I'm assuming that Active Directory has a vision moving forward that it's going to be providing users as Windows evolves and increases its functionality. Can we touch upon that a little bit?
we have in our future plans for Active Directory, the fundamental thing that we're doing is we're stepping up a level and providing an even more powerful infrastructure for integrating the data that's in enterprises today, and for integrating different technical solutions to some of these similar problems. I said that one of the key things was being able to share data and administer the data in one place. The fact is that today in enterprises there is data in anywhere between 5. This is from a study, an independent study, between 5 and 150 different databases often contain user-related information in companies. Okay?
In one company.
In one company. At Microsoft, I don't think it's 150. I think it's about 40. Okay. But
yeah, I mean, yeah, we got the SAP system, we got our, different email system, we, Exchange is the email system, we've got information in there, we've got Active Directory in the old NT4 domain environment that we used to have before we moved over to Windows 2000. We've got a bunch of line of business applications that, because that plumbing wasn't there and infrastructure wasn't there, went in and built their own kind of address book capabilities and security capabilities. So they're all over the map, right? And their customers are saying, look, come on, Microsoft, help me. So Dave's helping them.
So, and we're helping them in 2 ways, because the first approach is exactly what we've just been talking about, what we'll call consolidation around a common directory and substrate. That's Active Directory. But in the second case, you need to recognize that this data is in different places already. And furthermore, downstream, there may be some solutions that are better technical solutions for particular problems. Okay, it may be simpler to have a single instance of a database for certain applications that may be more appropriate than a global using a global directory for that example. But it still may have user information or other common information in it. So I've danced around the word for quite some time now, but the word that sums this up is meta-directory. Moving up a level, what we have is a technology, and we acquired the core of this technology this summer from Zoomit Corporation after looking at the different technology options available. And what the meta-directory does is the meta-directory lets you integrate and view and manage and keep in sync the data from all this myriad of data sources that are in the enterprise today, or some of the unique technical solutions that may exist downstream, or partitioning of data downstream, where you may want a piece of your directory to be replicated and published externally, okay, or published to other sources. And the meta-directory can take care of that. The meta-directory basically is a technology for brokering data, for transforming data, for applying business rules. Okay, the classic scenario, and today at Microsoft, the solution would be it's a custom application that does this, and that's exactly what happens at almost every company. There's some custom application. Somebody's hired into the company, and that user is actually added to the human resources database. Well, with a meta-directory, that flows to the meta-directory, and the meta-directory then says, okay, fine, so I have to enable this person for remote access because they're in this group, and I know that we do that for them. And I have to set them up an email account, right? And I have to set up their approval levels in SAP. And as well, I need to publish their telephone number, to my telephone infrastructure. And so it will take care of the publishing of that data to all the appropriate places. And then when data is changed in a place, say the telephone numbers are managed by the telephone group after that, it will flow back to all the other databases that also have to have the telephone number. And if the form is different, if the attributes are different because the schemas were developed independently, it takes care of that transformation. It even understands the ownership of different data. It understands that if you try to change the telephone number in the email directory, it may say, no, that shouldn't have happened. It will actually flow back. And so the meta directory takes all these common sources and transforms the data, keeps them in sync, and then also strives for consistency and accuracy. It recognizes that because things are offline, there may be updates that haven't happened yet. In fact, that's another very good perspective. So when you've got a bunch of different databases, you got 2 ways to update them all. You can either flow the data to all of them individually as they're available, or you can try to transact it. If you transact it, first off, all these databases don't have transaction semantics. Secondly, it could take forever when there's a large number of databases. You have to wait till the last one is available. okay? And the first one's still available. So the meta directory is a much better solution for that, where it will track and constantly seek to arrive at consistency of the view of the data as defined in the rules that you set up. So it's a very powerful tool and basically moving up in level of the services of Active Directory to encompass all the related data in an enterprise and allow you to manage it.
Okay, so to summarize all that, essentially what you're saying is the meta directory and how that's coming forward is it would allow some level of individual packets of data to still exist, but wrapped around with rules that maintain a linkage between them and each other and the main Active Directory database.
That's right. And those, there will be those applications that use those special databases exist today, and they're not going to be replaced overnight.
Right.
Or there may be those special solutions I talked about going forward that are appropriate in specific cases. But the meta directory ties it together.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, most corporations that have the desire to want to run to a standard directory backbone infrastructure, and we think Active Directory is very well positioned to be that. But that doesn't mean it's going to be the only place information exists, right? And so you might have this directory backbone, and you're using it in various ways, but there's all these islands of things, whether it's your HR department or whether it's your payroll department or the phone, telephony folks, that they're still going to have their central data that they use to manage their environments. And the meta directory just brings all that together, and the strength of it is, like Dave said, was the schema mapping across those and the business rules and logic you can put against it. And so that's why, and all of our customers are asking for that capability, because you're never going to get to one, right? There's always going to be multiple places where information like user objects, security objects, those kind of things are stored, other types of resources, and having the ability to bring it all together into one management place, one schema definition mapping place, and one business rules place is a big, big, powerful thing. And that's really one of the big driving factors for us moving forward.
Mm-hmm. Well, thanks. I mean, I think you've shared a lot of great information about what Active Directory is, how it incorporates in Windows 2000, and where it's going to be going moving forward. And most importantly, hopefully driven home to our audience, the programmer audience, why they need to be thinking about adding Active Directory functionality to their applications, as well as interacting with other applications that are utilizing it.
Yep.
Thanks for your time, and go out and party some more.
All right, well,
Thanks.
See you, man.
See you again.
Okay. Thank you.
Sorry. Not enough. Nope, still short.
For the high-performance, reliable OS for all business PCs.
Paper or plastic? Paper!
Make it Windows NT Workstation 4.0.
Guys, we need a receipt.
Welcome back. Now, we've dealt with the architectural side of Active Directory, and I expect a lot of you programmers out there are wanting to see some real code going on and what Active Directory means to programmers, not just to administrators and system integrators and so forth. So to touch on the programming aspects of Active Directory, I have with me Mike Muller. He's from Visio Corporation, where he's a software design engineer working on some of Visio's new projects. Welcome, Mike. Glad you could join us.
Glad to be here.
Now, you've been working with Active Directory for about how long in code?
About 7 months, 6 to 7 months.
Okay. During the beta cycle of Windows 2000, you were reading all the documentation and finding out how it dealt with your problems?
Right. We were doing a development on the Visio 2000 release, and we wanted to have an Active Directory solution.
What do you mean by that?
Well, Visio is a tool for graphical diagramming primarily. We do things like org charts and flow charts and a lot of software documentation. One of the things that we wanted to do in Visio 2000 was to be able to diagram directory services. LDAP, standard LDAP directories, NDS, and particularly Active Directory.
So since Active Directory is presenting in data a hierarchical model of information, you're providing a mechanism for a visual interface to allow system administrators to see what that data looks like in an org chart format.
Exactly. In fact, we use very much the same paradigm as our org chart solution, the idea of being able to drop a shape on top of another shape and have it automatically be laid out.
So why don't we take a look at the program, just kind of give an idea visually of what an Active Directory model looks like.
Sure. I've imported our test company, which is called Newcom. And when you initially import, it shows up over in this area here, which is called our tree control. And basically, it looks like any tree control. We've got Newcom at the top and all of our organizational units. We have executive and our Fargo location, finance and administration, Frankfurt, operations, research and development, etc. What I'm going to do is I'm going to drag out one of the organizational units, which in fact has other units below it, and beneath those organizational units are users and computers.
Now, when you're talking about organizational units, these are nodes in an Active Directory database.
Correct. So I'm going to drag out the sales and marketing organizational unit out onto the drawing surface. This is standard Visio. And I'm going to add a shape for sales and marketing plus all of its immediate descendants. Now, this is just Visio laying it out, but what's happened is before we have actually gone out to the Active Directory and we have queried the directory, gone through a search of the directory, asked it to bring in the sales and marketing and all of its children and all the properties. So for example, I can right click on sales and marketing, I get a right mouse action menu, and I can say I want to look at the properties. And what I will see here is all the properties for an organizational unit, and in particular this one. So you'll see its distinguished name here. You can look at these are the mandatory properties. You can look at the optional properties, and we display some of the properties like the date that this object was created and when it was last changed, and so on and so forth. And of course, the properties are different for each object. Now, we've also got other information under this, so I'm going to go over here to the Creative Services organizational unit. I'm going to right-click and say I want to show the children of that. And what this is going to show me is all the users underneath this. Again, this would have been going out to the Active Directory and doing a search of all of the objects underneath this. And in fact, we can look at the code that does that. Now, what we'll look at, and this is, we wrote a class to kind of surround almost everything we do with the Active Directory. We do via the directory search function. I wrote a small class to wrap this, so I'll show you what it does to actually invoke the class to do the search, to do what we just did, and then we can go look at the code underneath.
Now, instead of doing a search, wouldn't the enumerate function have worked better for this?
There is an enumerate function in Active Directory. However, what we found was that the enumerate function actually does a search underneath the covers, but it brings back all of the children. And from the point of view of efficiency and performance for large data sets, which is typically what we have, we were typically thinking we're going to be dealing with directories with 1,000 objects in a node. We found that search was much faster for a couple of reasons. One was that we could control how many objects we got back at one time. So if we were going to get 5,000 objects, we wanted to be able to give the user a chance to cancel. So with the search function, we're allowed to actually get them back 100 at a time, for example, and to be able to cancel the search at any time. We found we couldn't do that with the enumeration function. It would have to go get all 10,000 and then start giving them to us one at a time.
So I guess to some extent, anybody out there right now that's using Active Directory programming and might be using the enumerate function because it sounded like the obvious one to use in their case, they might want to look at the search function and try that instead to see if it improves their performance.
If you're retrieving large numbers of objects, I definitely would suggest looking at the search function. What we've done here, when I right-clicked on the Creative Services organizational unit and said I wanted to show the children, essentially what we did was we went out and we did a search to find all the children of that particular organizational unit. And we passed a path, which ends up being a B string, which is passed into this particular function. The path is just what's called the distinguished name of that organizational unit. So, for example, that particular thing was Creative Services underneath Newcom, so the distinguished name would be OU equal Creative Services, comma, OU equal Newcom, comma, DC equal widget dc equal com, which is our directory. And we pass in, we pass in a username and a password. We wanted to be able to run this application whether you were actually validated to the domain where the directory was, or if you were coming in, say, via an NT40 domain, or just coming into a different domain. So Active Directory is very good about that. If you, ADSI allows you to make a call to say, I want to open this object, and you can either pass it a username and password and say, please use these credentials, or you can say, use my current credentials. So it works either way. And in fact, we first test to see if your current credentials are valid before we ask you for other credentials.
Now, that gets in another situation. We talked earlier with Brian Dave about the notion of creating a good, strong security model within your corporation. And again, you're reiterating the fact that since quite often these nodes of information are going to have security attachments related to specific individuals or groups they belong to, it just increases the need for companies to make sure that they know what they're doing from a security model, and they're creating a good security model for all their employees and groups within it.
That's very true. It's always been the case that you've had to have a good security model. It's a little easier to enforce that security model in Active Directory because you have so many more ways of doing things with group policies and being able to apply policies at various levels. But it's always important to do that. What we've done here then is we've just created a search object. This goes out and makes, this actually doesn't make any Active Directory calls. This merely sets things up. We then apply a filter. And what we're saying here is we're saying, I want to get all of the objects, no matter what their category is. We could have applied a filter and say, I only want to get users, or I only want to get printers, or I only want to get users that belong to a particular group, or I only want to get the users that report to Harry Walker, things like this. So we can always, as part of the search, apply a filter, which is a search criteria, just as you would apply if you were making a database call, for example, to narrow the search. In our case, we generally either get all the objects or only the objects of a certain class. But here we've said we wanted to get all the objects, so we set a default filter, which says that the object category is star, anything. We then set some preferences. And one of the things we've done here is there's a number of things that you can set in terms of preferences to a search. One of the preferences that we set by default is that we only want the search to return 100 objects at a time. And then we can ask for another 100 objects. So it gives us a chance to interrupt an import, or a user a chance to say, I want to cancel this when they see that they're getting a lot of users and they don't, or a lot of objects and they don't want them. So we are setting here the search scope to say only search one level below this object. We could search the entire subtree, we'd get a whole lot more objects, or we can search the current level. You can also say, I just want to search the current object, which is a way of going and getting just one object. And then we call execute search. And let me show you what execute search actually does. The execute search function, which is right here, essentially we can pass it a list of attributes and the number of attributes. So we can say, just give me the name, just give me the distinguished name and the common name, for example. Or we can say, give me all the attributes, which is what we typically do. What we've done here is, and here's the actual ADSI calls we make. It's very simple. We tell ADSI to please open the object named by this path using these credentials, this username and this password. We want to use secure authentication. We can choose to use non-secure authentication, which we would have to do if we were going to an LDAP server, say, on a non-NT machine. And we want it to give us back a directory search object. And this is a COM object that is an ADSI that allows us to get back information about a directory search and peruse the results of that search. It's kind of like a result set in ODBC. So we open the object. This gives us the base of our search. We then set up the search preferences that we passed in, and we execute the search with the filter, the attributes, And that's what we do. We execute the search. We now have waiting for us a result set that we're going to get back in batches of 100.
So a lot of the code we've looked at so far then is basically just kind of setting up a lot of the parameters and filters associated with the search we're end up going to call on.
Right, and there's not much to do. I discovered having had to go through also doing exactly the same thing using standard LDAP, that there's a lot less to set up using ADSI. ADSI is set up of COM objects, so it works very well with C++ as opposed to LDAP, which is very much a C-oriented interface. So I found it a lot easier to do.
Well, I remember back in the days when I used to write code to fetch and retrieve data values out of the registration database. I mean, seemed like a ton of code that I had to write every single time in order to reach in and enumerate through the registration database. And this looks a lot simpler.
This is as simple as executing a search. And in fact, let's go back to here, executing a search, doing a next row, and here's where we check our progress. We throw up, when we import, we throw up a progress dialog. We list out the number of users or objects that we've retrieved, and the user has the option to press a cancel button. If the user
that's because you search rather than enumerate.
Right.
You specify the chunk size.
Right.
How much data bits you
Because we specify the chunk size, the user, we get back 100 objects, and then we check to see if the user's clicked the cancel button. 100 objects, check to see if it was a very simple thing to do. But essentially, we call next row, which just gets us the next object in the result set, and then we just start asking for columns. And for each column, we just set up a search column, what's called a search column. We get the distinguished name, if we need that, the object class, and things like this. But again, it's almost like writing ODBC code. If you've written ODBC code, you're going to find that ADSI looks exactly like ODBC.
Just a database.
It's just like going to a database. The other thing, well, let's go back to the demo. So what we've done now is shown you how the code we've gone through to list out the children of this. I'm going to go over here to another one, and I'm going to show the children of that one because I want to show one other thing that we do and how it works. Here we have Scott here, who is a member of Creative Services, and I'm going to look at the properties for Scott. And here's all of Scott's properties. His name, notice that there'll be different sets of properties because this is now a user object. And here we have Scott's distinguished name. CN equals Scott Kingston, OU equal Creative Services, so on and so forth. This is what uniquely identifies Scott. One of the things that we want to use Visio to do is we want to transfer Scott from Creative Services to Events. Scott has changed his position. So in order to do that, we want to make it easy for an administrator to say, okay, Scott's now moved. I'm going to put him under control of Events, but I don't want to have to recreate Scott's email address. I don't want to change all of the information about Scott. Well, you can do this fairly easily in the administrator, but visually, all we do is we take Scott and we drag him and we drop him on Events. Scott has now moved over to Events. Here he is here. And if we click on the properties and show his properties, all of his properties are the same except for his distinguished name. His distinguished name is now Scott Kingston in Events, in NewCom, WidgetCom, rather than in Creative Services. There's a couple other things that are kind of interesting, and one that I'd like to kind of point out that I found really different between using ADSI and Active Directory and using a standard LDAP directory, and that's getting schema information. I believe they've said this morning that you can expand the Active Directory schema. You can add new properties to existing classes. You can add new classes. For example, let's say one of the things Visio does is draw floor diagrams. We have a facilities management solution. One of the things we've talked about doing is having a universal locator application using the Active Directory. So what we would do is extend the user object to have a office number or a specific number, we can then bring up a floor chart of our headquarters in downtown Seattle for the 5th floor. And if you click on Mike Muller and say, where is Mike Muller, we can put you up a drawing with an arrow pointing to Mike Muller's office to show you exactly where to go. Or probably more interesting, if you want to know where the color printer is, we can show you where the color printer is. We would do that via the Active Directory by adding something to the schema that would link together the user and the position in our drawing. We have to, in order for us to be able to show all the stuff, we have to know what the Active Directory schema is. So we have to actually go out the Active Directory, read the schema, and we actually bring in all of the classes that are out there. Most of these classes in this example are just the standard classes that come with Active Directory, but we also need to bring in those classes which have been created specifically for a given application or in a given enterprise. Or, for example, when Platinum comes out, the new Exchange comes out, those classes will be in Active Directory. One of the things we discovered very early on was that in Active Directory, the schema is just another part of the schema and is treated exactly the same way as objects. So we use exactly the same search code to go out and retrieve all of the schema objects and create this schema tree that we did to go out and retrieve the other objects. The code is identical. In LDAP, there's a completely different way of doing this, where you go out and you get a bunch of text strings and you have to parse them apart. It's quite awkward compared to Active Directory. So it's very easy in Active Directory to go out, peruse the schema, find out what classes exist. In our case, bringing in all the properties for those classes and being able to populate this tree. I was pleased at how easy it was and how similar it was to using ODBC. I'd done a lot of database applications in the past, and I was pleased at how similar it was to some of the other interfaces that we've dealt with, ODBC, the WMI interface, things like that. Active Directory seems to fit right in, so it was natural. It was an easy thing to do.
Well, I mean, your application looks really great the way it visualizes the Active Directory and the code examples, walking into it and stuff. One thing that kind of strikes me, though, is that, I mean, your application is designed to interrogate Active Directory, and so it's obvious why you'd be using Active Directory to do that with. The audience, those people who are doing that same sort of stuff, they're also going to realize that Active Directory is the right thing for them to use. What about people that don't have an obvious need for Active Directory, aren't trying to administer users or that sort of stuff? Does Active Directory and coding to the Active Directory, does it still give them some benefits?
I believe so. Part of what I think people are going to find that they can do is to use the directory to store information, to tie together different objects in the directory so that they can put together kind of a whole application. There's stuff out there already for administering users and computers, but to be able to take that information and tie it in with other things, I think that using the directory is going to be a good way to do that.
Let's try getting a little bit more obscure than that even. Let's say I was writing a game, like, Doom or Age of Empires or Flight Simulator or something like that. Do you think Active Directory has something that I could use for that?
Well, what comes to mind would be, let's say let's take Doom, and let's say we have a version of Doom where I can have my own personality, strength points, what weapons I have, maybe what I look like on the screen, and I want to be able to have access to that no matter where I am. So I don't want to have all that stored locally on my computer. I would like to have it stored somewhere where if I go down to the lab and we're all going to have a big Doom or a big Quake game down at the lab, that I can access my profile. Storing that profile in the Active Directory means that it's available to me no matter where I am, as long as that I am in a machine that has connectivity to the directory. I think a lot of different applications, probably ones with more business-like reasons, but a lot of the applications will want to use the Active Directory to store both user data and to store data as to where they are, to be able to publish publish their solutions. Another thing, for example, is what if I had a number of different services that went out and did network discovery? We have a product that does a level 2 network discovery. What if I wanted to have that as a service, and I wanted an application to say, I'd like to go get the information from the level 2 discovery for this particular subnet. For us, the thing to do would be to publish that in the Active Directory so that I could then do a query and say, show me where all of the discovery services are and list them to me by subnet or by location. And I could make a query to the Active Directory if that's published there, find out where that is, find the machine that service is on, find out all the information I need to connect to that service and retrieve the information and draw a diagram. So I believe where this is going to be very, very useful is in being able to take the kinds of information that was very difficult to publish before, that you would have to put in a database and make the database available, or that you would have to pass around, that you can actually put it in the Active Directory, and all you need to know is to know what object to look for, and from wherever you are with directory connectivity, you can go retrieve that object, get that information. So it's kind of like a distributed registry, if I was going to simplify it.
So at one level, you have the notion where an individual user is roaming from machine to machine, and they're able to take their configuration with them as they go easily across. And then the other notion is you have, from a single machine, being able to actually discover information in other locations about other physical locations or users or so forth.
Right.
And if your application is needing any sort of that functionality, it's able to be applicable to Active Directory.
Right. Any sort of enterprise application, and especially where you have to access it from multiple locations, or you have multiple areas trying to get to that same information. I think Active Directory is going to be a good way to do it.
Okay, so let's say you're in a network scenario connected to a corporate network, and then that same application is installed on a standalone machine, and how do you deal with that? Now, obviously, since you're maintaining, you're querying the Active Directory and maintaining that information in a local data store, you're doing that already. You're taking and not requiring the Active Directory store to be there beneath you as you're operating upon it. How difficult is that negotiation to happen?
We found it very easy to actually have an application that didn't necessarily depend on the Active Directory, but was aware of the Active Directory, would use it if it was there, and had a backup if it wasn't there. Now, of course, if data that your application depended on to even start up was in the Active Directory and you couldn't connect, you'd have a different sort of a scenario. In our case, it's very easy for us to determine if it's there, and if it's not there, we say, I'm sorry, you just can't import.
So from that standpoint, an application that was going to require the Active Directory should at least think through that process of when the Active Directory wasn't going to be available to them and do the right thing, whether it's posting up a dialog box explaining what the situation was, or attempting to get the data from a local cache of information and proceed from there.
Exactly. And to potentially also think about using going through a sequence of credentials in order to connect. Because in terms of ADSI, if you are validated, if you are logged into the domain where the Active Directory server is, you obviously want to use the credentials that you're logged in for, and you don't want to ask the user for more credentials. And that's what we do. We attempt to make a connection with the default credential. If that fails, we then go and ask the user for credentials. And it's a very simple process, but it's something that you want to think through.
It's just part of the whole user experience that you're designing in your application.
That's right.
Well, thanks a lot, Mike. In closing, are there any pointers you think that a programmer interested in Active Directory might need to know to move forward from here?
The main thing is to read the documentation. It now all of the red lines saying this is preliminary documentation have now been removed, so it's a little more comfortable to read the documentation.
So I assume that was a problem you were running into earlier on during the beta phase.
Well, it wasn't a problem, but it was a little unsettling to be writing an application that was going to be released actually before Win2K came out, and be writing all this documentation saying this is subject to change, and wondering if when the next release came out, it was going to change out from under you. As it turns out, it didn't. We had absolutely no problems. It was very straightforward all the way through.
Well, thanks, Mike. I appreciated the time I spent with you and being able to see not only your application and visually understand what Active Directory looks like from a hierarchical model, but also see some of the code that you wrote in order to dive into Active Directory and pull those data points out of it.
Thanks for having me.
Well, that ends our examination of Active Directory and how it relates to Windows 2000. We touched upon the architecture and the vision and understanding, how it means moving forward from Windows 2000 and beyond. And we also dealt with it from a programmer standpoint and what it means to actually write code for the Active Directory for a wide variety of applications. The Visio application is just one example of an application that can use Active Directory. I'm hoping that after seeing this, you'll be able to find ways that your applications can leverage this technology to work even better on Windows 2000. Thanks for joining us. Welcome to Anacortes, Washington. We're here to talk with Scott Skarupa. He's a dev manager in the Windows CE team. Here in the Puget Sound region, we have a lot of water, which means a lot of people partake in boats. It seems like some people at Microsoft also have enough spare time to partake as well. Let's go talk with Scott and find out how he manages to do it. So Scott, it's such a nice day out here today. It seems a shame to be having to waste it sitting on top of your boat talking about things like this.
Well, it's a great way to get away from the stress at work, and we don't get a whole lot of days like this, so it's great to be out here enjoying it.
Earlier I mentioned that you worked for the Windows CE team. What exactly is it you do?
Well, right now I'm the development manager for one of our new groups for a product I can't really say too much about. What I can say is Bill Gates did demo some of our technology at the Telecom 99 conference in the fall.
And how long have you worked in the Windows CE team?
I've been in the Windows CE group for about 5 years. I was actually one of the original team members for the Pegasus project, which was the handheld PC 1.0, and me and another person wrote the calendar and task manager applications.
What do you think are some of the important aspects that you learned in developing an application?
What it does for us is it gives us, I think the big win is, it's a subset of the Win32 APIs is what it brings to the development community. And so what you get is you get a large community of developers out there who are very familiar with your programming model, and it's very easy for them to pick up these various devices that we're coming out with and start writing applications.
Yeah, these devices sure are popular nowadays. They're, practically as powerful as some of the mainframes I used to work on.
Oh, absolutely. For instance, I know the HP Jornada, the handheld PC, the latest one, I believe is running a 190 megahertz SA1100 processor on it, which is awful lot of processing power these days.
And how did you get your start at Microsoft?
Originally, I was a co-op in college, so I took a semester off of college and I answered PSS phone calls on DOS Word. And then from there, I was hired straight out of school and went into the developer support organization about the time Windows 3.0 shipped.
You mentioned a co-op. What exactly is that?
A co-op was an internship where you had an agreement with Microsoft to work for 9 months, and then they would give you a computer and actually pay you pretty well for a college student. And then you got all kinds of experience in the industry.
And from there, you went into being a PSS employee full-time?
Yes, I became a full-time employee in the developer support organization, which was a little bit different because most of the support was handled electronically, and they were actual technical programming questions coming from other developers out there. And it was probably more challenging than writing code because you had to be able to answer any random question about any part of the OS at any given time to someone, and there's just not a lot of people that know everything about everything. That's essentially what you're expected to know.
I suppose then you didn't get any of those weird sort of questions like people using their mouse as a foot pedal and stuff like that.
No, I did not get those kinds of questions.
What other sort of projects did you work on?
Out of developer support, I went and I worked on the Macintosh version of object linking and embedding for a while. And that sort of merged into the Win32 team. So I worked on Windows NT 3.5 and 4.0, and Windows 95 and delivered object linking embedding for those.
And then from there you went straight to Windows CE.
Yes, I was hired into the Windows CE group after Windows 95 shipped.
So I suppose since we're sitting out here in a boat doing this interview, this must be one of your spare time hobbies.
When I'm far away from the shipping cycle, or from actually shipping a product, I like to take a lot of time off on the weekends, and even take some 3-day weekends to come up here and go on the boat and just get away from people, because I know when we get close to shipping, I'm really working, 12, 14-hour days, 7 days a week.
And how long have you been into boats?
I grew up around boats. My parents have had boats as long as I could remember, and basically once I was old enough and had enough money to buy a boat of my own, I've been buying them.
I suppose since you work in a technical company, you probably have a lot of geeky hardware on your boat?
Well, actually I do. I am in the process of installing all kinds of cool gadgets, but right now what I have is I have a laptop that's hooked up to a GPS with some charting software, and it will actually show where the boat is on the chart as we move around. I've also got things like a radar. I have a couple of different depth sounders. One of them is a forward scanning sonar, so I can see the bottom getting deeper or shallower in front of me, so I know before I get there rather than after I get there. I've got a differential GPS and an autopilot. Eventually I'm going to have all of these things tied right through the computer.
Well, that sure sounds like enough geeky hardware sitting on this boat.
Well, yeah, but I'm going to even make it geekier. We're a good couple-hour drive from Redmond, which is down by where I live, and during the winter I can't get up to the boat very often to check on it. So what I'm going to try to do is set up the laptop to monitor the boat for me and post information up on the web so I can avoid the long drive. I'm thinking of doing things like adding a USB camera so I can have a picture of the boat or the surroundings to make sure everything's okay and it hasn't sunk yet. As well as you can buy weather stations that you can dock to a PC and use that to monitor the current weather conditions. So if it's been particularly cold out for a long period, that might make me drive up here and check to make sure nothing is frozen on it.
So you're putting your boat on the web then?
Oh yeah, gotta do it.
So it's such a nice day out here. Let's say we take the boat out for a spin and have a nice long weekend of it.
Well, we should, but I gotta get back to work. It's the busy time of year.
Well, thanks a lot, Scott. I really enjoyed talking with you here, and you got a really nice boat, and boy, a little sunshine never hurts anybody.
Okay, great. It was nice talking with you as well.
Well, that's it from the marina here at Anacortes. Such a beautiful day out there. It's a shame that I've got to go back to work, but I expect you guys do too. So thanks for joining us. Well, that's the show. I hope you perhaps learned something about Active Directory and Windows 2000 and how you can make use of these technologies in your applications. Now remember to check out the bottom of the transcript window, where you'll find links to additional information that some of our speakers talked about during their sections. We'll be having more episodes of the MSDN show coming up future on the web, covering Windows 2000 and many other great technologies from Microsoft. In the meantime, I'll see you on the web.